Fun fact, one of the members' name is Jin, and I'm Jin. Maybe it's just me, but I think we might look alike. Hey guys, it's King Gan. For this week's episode, we'll talk about money. Who doesn't like money? Not this guy. We'll talk more about who's the richest person in South Korea. People might think the founders of Samsung, Hyundai, might be the richest person in South Korea. Definitely not BTS. Fun fact, one of the members' name is Jin, and I'm Jin. Maybe it's just me, but I think we might look alike. But the richest man in Korea is actually a financier, people's nemesis, the private equity guy. After we look at this list, I will walk you through how you can get so rich from private equity. Beware, this Forbes report is self-reported. So if you have tons of moolah and do not want to be public about it, you will not be on this list, aka tax evasion. But historically, families of large conglomerates, aka chaebars, were the richest in South Korea. But with the advancement of technology, we are seeing newly minted billionaires on this list. If you look at the top 10, out of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 40% of the top 10 people are quote unquote in technology sector. The richest person in South Korea is Michael Kim, founder and head of MBK Partners. He is also the protagonist of our episode. He used to be a head of Carlyle Asia, Carlyle being top 5 funds in the world, and left to make his own private equity fund named after himself, MBK Partners, in 2005. This is the largest Korean private equity firm and largest independent private equity fund in Asia. You can see he is worth $9.7 billion. Like, who's the second richest person in South Korea is Jae-yong Lee. Kind of like the fact that he used Y as his middle name, but people probably thought Lee Jae-yong is probably the richest guy in South Korea. But as a leader of Korea's biggest conglomerate, Samsung, he was the richest person for some time. But let's look at what has happened in the stock market. It's trading at, 64,000 won, Korean won. At the peak, it was 81,000. So it's down about 30% from the peak, so it makes sense that he isn't the richest person in South Korea anymore. As an individual, as you can see, Michael Kim is the richest person in South Korea. But we cannot disregard the Samsung family, who still has the largest influence and wealth in South Korea. Jae-yong Lee, Hong Ra-hee, who is the mother of Jae-yong Lee, and Lee Bu-jin, who is a sister of Jae-yong Lee. We often joke in Korea that Korea is Samsung Republic because of the amount of influence and power that Samsung has on the country. But let's get back to our topic. So what is private equity? People always say money makes money. This is the example of money makes money. So what is private equity? This term is so broad now, but simply put, you collect capital to invest in quote unquote private assets. Private assets include bonds, real estate, companies. Originally, the term private equity is associated with the term leveraged buyout, where you take leverage, simply think of that as money borrowed from banks or lenders to buy a company. Who's the pioneer of private equity? Was the man associated with the first LBO. Jerome Kohlberg Jr. in the 1960s. Jerome Kohlberg Jr. later founded the firm that everyone might have heard of called KKR, one of the largest private equity firms in the world. Interestingly, KKR is also run by a Korean man named Joe Bae. Let's go, Korea! So, going back to this topic, there are 3 ways of making money in private equity. One is called management fee, and second is called carried interest. Third is fund ownership, asset under management, AUM, which simply means how much money you are managing. Let's say you raised $100 million fund and you're a super gigabrain genius and you $200 million fund with $100 million of profit, then the AUM is now $200 million before you return the capital to investors. So what is a management fee? It can vary by a fund. It can be as low as 1%, or it can be as high as 3% plus, but usually a private equity firm charges 2% per year to literally manage the fund. They'll use this fee to pay overhead expenses like office rent, salary, etc. So if you took some money and you have leftover, where does that go? Into the pocket of the owner of the fund. So that's the beauty of management fee. Expenses stay flat, while the larger the fund, the larger management fee is, the more profit that the owners of the fund will make. Even more stable and predictable cash flow that you can think of, because this is in a contract. So what I did was I basically imported all the funds raised by MBK and walk you through how this management fee works. Assuming usually a fund is a 10-year fund, you can take the management fee for 10 years or the duration of the fund. So let's look at it. MBK first fund was $1.5 billion, second fund was $1.5 billion, etc. And this is a year that it was established, 2005, 2009, 2013. So assuming that they will start taking management fee 1 year after they were established, for instance, for MBK1, they start taking a management fee from 2006 and onward. So as you can see, for all the funds, I'm assuming they will take the management fee from the year afterwards. And until 2022, if you add all those management fee that the fund has taken, they have taken to date $1.9 billion of management fee alone. $2 billion just from management fee, just from managing the fund without any type of return. That's the beauty of private equity's management fee model. Let's now talk about the second one, carried interest. This simply means success fee. You basically take percentage of the profit that you generated for your investors in the fund. PE funds can take as low as 10% to as large as 30% plus for the amount that they have generated for the investors. But usually the PE funds charge 20% carried interest. Hence the term 2 and 20. 2% management fee every year, 20% carried interest. Carried interest calculation can be very complicated. There's such things as European, American way of calculating carried interest, hurdle rate, etc., blah, 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 blah. But let's keep it simple, guys. Let's say you raise a $100 million fund. And again, you double the fund because you're this gigabrain, smart, Chad, blah, 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 blah. After I return, when I raised a $100 million fund and it became a $200 million fund, the profit is what? $100 million. And if you take 20% carried interest, you basically calculate the profit times 20%. In this case, it will be $20 million of carried interest going to the fund that can be distributed to the workers. $20 million to the fund, $80 million back to the investors. Is it not fair? Maybe it's time for us to go back to Harvard Business School and go to private equity. So a good proxy for how much carried interest MBK partners have made is by looking at the AUM, as we talked about before. The AUM is $25.6 billion as of 2021. If you add up all the funds that they have raised from MBK Partners 1 to Special Situations 2, we get $19 billion. Again, they raised $19 billion, but their AUM is $25.6 billion. So they made a profit of $6.6 billion. Assuming 20% carried interest, in the simple calculation, they probably made closer to $1.3 billion just in carried interest that goes back to the fund, especially to MBK. And lastly, the vast majority of its net worth is probably fund ownership. When there's so much capital as we saw in 2020 to 2022, smart Wall Street geniuses try to find products to maximize return of excess capital out there. They would make funds to invest in other private equity or venture capital funds. What does this mean is that they would take the ownership percentage of private equity fund and get the share percentage of the earnings, or management fee and carried interest. As you can see, in January 2022, Michael Kim's private equity firm MBK sells stake to Dial Capital, which I said is another new platform that basically buys stake of these successful private equity funds. So they sold a 13% stake of the fund to Dial Capital Partners for about $1 billion. $1 billion. We just saw that Michael Kim sold 13% of the stake of the fund for a $1 billion. What does this mean? They value the fund to be then how much money? They're valuing the fund to be about 7.7 billion plus. So basically the fund is worth 7.7 billion dollars, and Michael Kim's stake in the fund is in billions, given that he is probably the majority owner as a founder. So if we summarize everything that we talked about, the fund made about $2 billion in management fee until 2022, carry of about $1.3 billion, assuming the fund is worth $7.7 billion, and MBK as a founder owns about 90%. If you do the math, he got $1.8 billion of income, $1.1 billion just from carry, and the position he has is $6.9 billion, blah. Theoretically, his income and what he's worth is over $9.8 billion, which is in line with what we saw on Forbes' richest list. Depending on the ownership of the fund, if it's 80%, 70%, 85%, the figure would differ. But my point is, as a majority owner of the fund that's been very successful, raising a lot of capital and having returned billions of dollars to investors, hopefully you guys could understand now why you can get so rich from private equity. And hopefully now you can see why you can get so rich from private equity, even if you do not create a large company that affects our daily lives. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, like, subscribe, leave comments, and for my Korean subscribers, Chotekwar. Hope to see you guys next week. See ya.